Welcome to episode 56 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK network at paukradio.com. So I'm delighted on this episode. My guest is a returning guest. Absolutely great interview the first time round, and I'm sure it will be equally as interesting this time round. It's Mr. Ronald Kinsella. Ronald, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Craig. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on the Paranormal Pendle.
Thank you. That's absolutely great. Do you prefer Ronald or Ronnie or Ron?
Ron would be fantastic.
Right, we shall go with that then, because sometimes people don't always like the name shortening, do they? So,
My grandfather always used to call me Ronald. I think he was the only one, apart from the teachers and colleagues at work, but my grandfather always called me Ronald. Everyone else called me Ronnie or Ron.
was Ronald usually when you'd done something wrong then, or something naughty?
No, it was permanent with Granddad. It's
Oh,
just a formality. He was in the
oh,
army, so
I see. Right. So was he quite a sort of stickler
uh,
for?
Granddad, yeah, he was very open-minded. Although he was the most down-to-earth person you could
Oh,
ever imagine,
right.
he was very open-minded. In fact, he was the one who told me that the pyramids were built by aliens when I was 13 or 14, I think. I couldn't believe it. It just came out with it.
Right.
And another incident which was interesting is the fact that Philip and I, back in the when we were younger, when we used to stay with them in Middlesex, their lovely house they had, great big house it was. We'd go down to this bargain bookshop and we'd pick a book, and one of them was about poltergeist. Now, I'm terrible because even though I had seen things, we used to take the mickey out of certain pictures of poltergeists, and this book was based on factual events, and
Right.
we were laughing at it. We took it back home and we showed Grandad. Well, he went ballistic, absolutely ballistic. He took it off as he confiscated it. He said, "You don't mess with the likes of them." And I put that lightly, what he said. He
Mm.
gave it us back, but he told us to burn it, which I did. When I got home to Luton, we put it in a wheelbarrow and burnt it. I never read it. So obviously there was something there. Grandad uh, didn't want us to dabble with things that he appeared to be very real.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually how you became interested initially in the subject of the paranormal and UFOs and UAPs. So I suppose really your grandfather was one of the major influences then on your interest in this sort of thing from an early age.
He was, yes, and it's not just Grandad. It's what we saw. Philip and I had an encounter with something when we were very small in Bignor House. I wasn't going to relay this in Digital Demon, but I thought I'd come out with it in Illusions. It's not something that people say, "Oh, you're adding on,"
Mm.
because I believe I mentioned this. I think it was in Twin Souls, a book I had published by Capelban in 2012. This is when I was coming out with it,
Mm.
a publishing company. They're folded now, but they published the book. I don't think it did exceptionally well. It got very little exposure, but it was out there anyway. But it was to do with, call it the bug at Bignell, when we lived on the property of Bignell House in Chesterton, outside of Oxfordshire, I think, near Bicester.
Mm.
And the grounds, it was off road, it was private. So there was plenty of wood there, woodland. It was near Gaggle Brook. We had a Labrador, golden Labrador called Prince. He was never there, never saw him hardly. He was always frolicking in the woods, he was. But it was one of these days that we saw something very bizarre. And the reason why I left it out was because it was so bizarre. I mean, what happened was that being kids, I was picking open these reeds. You know, you're curious as a
Mm.
kid, you prise them open, and there was this kind of polystyrene like material in there. It wasn't polystyrene. I wouldn't have known what that was then, but it was white.
Mm.
Just curious as toddlers are. And this thing, this little tiny bug jumped out, and it just immediately turned very big. It was taller than us. I mean, we're very small being toddlers, but it was taller than us. And the only thing I can remember of it was that it looked more or less today like a praying mantis thing. I don't know whether it had wings. I can't entirely remember, but it made a clicking sound. It was following us. We were horrified. We screamed and ran from it. And when it moved, it was blurry.
Mm.
The only thing I can remember was it was very blurry and it made this awful clicking sound. And that was it. I mean, the next thing, the tears were wiped away and we were having ice cream. So I don't know whether it was time displacement or what, but I have no idea. But that's, in a nutshell, very bizarre, isn't it?
Mm.
And then it moved on from there. You know, these strange happenings. I will say that in all of them that I've recorded, it will sound quite a lot in an hour or 2 hour on a radio show, but over the course of a lifespan, it's quite minimal. You
Mm.
know, when you actually when you think about it, they're quite minimal. These things that happen, but when you shorten it into an hour or so, it seems quite a lot. But that's basically what got me into this.
So, have you had any experiences with UFOs or anything like that?
Yes. The next major thing that happened was in 1982, so we were 13. I went out the garden with grandma. I can't remember exactly what day it was. I can't remember. I'm not going to make it fit. There was this silver orb that came over the garden and approached us. It was the size of a football. At first impression was it was a balloon, but it wasn't because it was controlled. It came over. Its height was level with a kind of second bedroom window of a house. So that's how high it was. And it came over and stopped above Grandma's head. And I had a damn good look at it. I was shocked. And it had no scenes on it. There was no cord. I had a damn good look at it. To me, it appeared like technology. It was silent, didn't make any noise, just hung there above her head. And we pointed to it and said, Grandma, look. And she looked and she said the most bizarrest thing. She said, oh, look, the fairies have come to take a closer look. Now, I believe she was trying to alleviate any fear we would have. Whether she'd seen them before or not, I don't know. She never said. But then it went up, straight up. And it then stopped and went over the roof of the house. And we raced in to the building. It was a 3-story house, quite big, to the front to see if we could see it. We could. And it was just shooting off. And that was it. Very bizarre. That's like something from Doctor Who. But I imagine, or later on, I imagine that was some type of electronic eye, some camera or something, I don't know, something reminiscent to the Foo Fighters as we have, yeah, of the Second World War, but it wasn't a glow. It was pure silver, although it was soiled, but that was the reflection of the world about it, you know, but very, very strange.
So it was very, very reflective then.
Yeah, it's like chrome. I can
Uh,
use that word now because
yeah.
then I wouldn't know what chrome was, but yes, it's like chrome.
So I suppose the material that it looked like would probably rule out something like a weather balloon, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, it moved in a controlled fashion and it
Right.
stopped dead
Yeah.
above her head.
Mhm.
This was controlled. I mean, this is what I'm quite used to when people say, "Well, it's like the Roswell ship, isn't it? It was a weather balloon."
Yeah.
I would think that the military were a bit more wiser to actually distinguish the difference between a flying saucer or a disc and a weather balloon. You know, I mean, goodness gracious me. So I get that with people saying automatically, or they'll state it that. Uh, you know, atmospheric anomalies. It was nothing of the sort. It was there, and this is in 1982, and it was very strange. And the way it moved, it just shot off.
Mm.
It accelerated. So
Yeah.
that was no balloon at
No,
all.
no, of course. No, of course. No, it's just a question that quite obviously you get asked quite a bit, or so
Yes, yeah,
a statement that's made quite a bit because um, that's the sort of thing that people would think of immediately after you sort of
yeah,
explain what
absolutely, yeah,
what you'd seen. But there is obviously a difference between a balloon which is at the whim of the eddies in the air and the wind and the breeze and everything else, and something which is being clearly mechanically controlled.
yeah. It was solid as well, completely solid. It appeared to me solid. It's not like like you when you look at a balloon, you can more or less tell it's a balloon. This was
Yeah,
solid,
yeah.
just solid, like a rock solid. It's the size of a football.
So how did you feel afterwards?
It was bizarre because I don't know. You couldn't talk about it, although Grandma was on the phone to a family member that night telling them what they'd seen. But strangely, it just seemed to just dissolve into oblivion, although it was never forgotten. It's the
Mm.
back of your mind, you know. It's only later on when you get older you question what they were, you know. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course you couldn't talk about it because they were poo-pooing mediums back then. Doris Stokes was hot in
Mm.
the early 80s, and I
Yeah.
remembered the terrible controversy even she caused with her readings where people didn't believe her. And of course, UFOs was completely off scale in that department. I mean, God, they just made a joke of it. So
Yeah.
we kept quiet about it, sensibly so.
Mm. No, absolutely. That's very interesting. So obviously, this has then had these incidents have had a big effect on your life over the years, and you've obviously become more and more interested and done more and more research. And your latest book is called Illusions, Smoke and Mirrors of the UFO, ET, and Paranormal Enigma. It's a
Yes.
fascinating title. Tell me a bit more about it.
Um, well, as you get older, I wouldn't say perhaps you get wiser, but you get more curious.
Hmm.
And I remembered I wanted to try and nail what we're dealing with because I'm not quite comfortable at the fact that we're dealing with or might be dealing with aliens from other worlds. It's a distinct possibility, and of course, arguments rage on and on about it, but we just don't know. I haven't got a clue what they are. So I looked into certainly the past of encounters um, with aliens, let's say, and I figured out that from the, and I think I mentioned this in the Digital Demon, the first book, certainly the aliens, to me, looking back at it, thinking about it, they didn't appear to have an overall kind of, what's the word I could use? There was no species that was dominant. They were all different. You had Vulcans, would you believe, aliens, Jellymen, you had the Nordics, you had pixies, you have the fairies, and we go on to the cryptids, you know, the werewolves. They seem to change. There was nothing really in vogue. We now know that the greys, the famous little big-eyed
Yeah.
embryonic-looking creatures, are uh, status quo in that department. They're the top. And I kept thinking, well, when did that come about? Because it certainly wasn't when Close Encounters was released. Certainly not. I tell you when that came about. That's when Whitley Strieber's best-selling book Communion was published. It was the image on that cover.
Hmm.
And then there was an explosion. And I noticed this. And I knew this was absolutely factual because everyone were reporting seeing the greys, you know, these creatures. And what's interesting about this is the fact that they appear to take on many different forms of um, being. I mean, I'll give you an example. I've drawn them, I've illustrated them, and people would comment that, oh, that's what they're like, and others would say, no, no, they had this skin, dolphin skin, they had wrinkles, they had this, that, and the other. And I kept thinking, well, are we dealing with a multitude of them, or are we dealing with something that's quite different that may not be them at all, although they may appear real? I don't think we're seeing the real thing. You know, the real McCoy, the true faces.
Yeah.
And one thing that came to mind, which is interesting, is the fact that I then thought about the AI art that can be produced now. It's not real artificial intelligence. It has to dip into reservoirs of pictures
Hmm.
to come up through prompts. We don't have true artificial intelligence yet. That's still science fiction, although they're drumming it into us. I used to program computers, so I know them very well. We're born in the golden age of them.
Hmm.
So I know them. There's no such thing as artificial. They can't think at all.
Hmm.
They process, and the algorithms, that's what they process. Even quantum uh, computers cannot think, although they call it 3D thought. It's a misconception.
Hmm.
It's processing speed. It's all it is speed at the moment. I dare say that in the future, they'll get clever and perhaps develop the first thinking computer. Anyway, back to this AI art. I tried it because I don't use it. I don't like it, but it's very clever because being an artist, it first of all sent shockwaves through me thinking, my goodness, we're going to be replaced now. But of course, that would, but of course, the problem with that is copyright issues.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
see, because of, so it is dipping into reservoirs of art, other people's art.
Mm.
And I tried it, and I realized that it cannot duplicate the same image twice. So it got me thinking about these grays. So if it is, or they are being produced by something else, is it possible that this thing or this force or power lacks consistency?
Mm.
It's only a thought, it's just a hypothesis. I'm just putting it out there. It's in my book. And if you will also look at the grays, they are, as I mentioned, embryonic in nature. And I also mentioned that more than not, what I read about, certainly at the turn of the century, um, the fact that they're into this apparent or alleged hybridization program. So isn't it fitting that they should more or less encompass or take on the persona of an embryonic kind of form? You see where I'm going with it?
Yeah.
Another thing that interested me, which I published in Illusions, is the fact that when you had contactees in the past, certainly in the 50s and onwards, whether they happened or not, we can't tell. We've got no proof, nothing. But
Mm.
we'll just go with the testimonies, right? So they're visited by these space beings, or space brothers, they call them. And you'll notice the ships always, more than not, landed traditionally. Means to say that then they came down, the landing gear came out, the door opened, they came and embraced the abductees, took them to God knows wherever. Well, I thought about that too. And it suddenly struck me that teleportation or transportation came shortly after Star Trek was released because they could beam people up. And then you saw this shift into a new kind of phase of abductions. You know, it moved from the traditional to the absolute outlandish.
Mm.
And that strengthened my case in assuming or concluding that we might be dealing with something else as well here that is not able to be consistent, but is there all the same. And it touches on things that border on almost a fantastic, but that can be kind of accepted due to the publications and the media and the belief systems switching. You see what I mean? You can't have a Dalek walking through a door to put the fear of God in you. They won't use that. It always has to be something just outside, basically more or less folklore,
Mm.
or during to do with the fad of aliens. And another thing I discovered was the fact that in the 50s, the B movies, they had all these silver flying saucers. Everything was silver, wasn't it? Silver spacemen,
Yeah.
silver flying saucers. Well, they were silver in the 50s onwards. They appeared silver. And I kept thinking, well, they've changed now, more or less to a degree. They have changed. Why would they need to be silver if they can implement shields? You know, not everything has to be silver. I know would think it is logical because it deflects radiation and it's a strong ally. But the point is, they're more advanced than us. Wouldn't they have much more advanced equipment at their disposal? These things, these issues that I raised, have formed a kind of pattern or a picture. I'm not saying that there's new with what I'm suggesting that they're a decoy,
Mm.
because I think Jack Fillet and some others have mentioned that. But I'm looked more into the particulars, like Star Trek and the silver,
Mm.
things like that. You know, the embryonic nature or the appearance of these greys to possibly illustrate the fact that that's what they're doing. Although I don't believe it at all. I don't believe it, and this is where it gets very messy because it's so compartmentalized. You know, people will say you are wrong. They are real. They are here to do this. That. Well, it's been what they've been told by them. How can you trust what they're telling you when we don't even know what they are, or if they're real for that matter? I'm not saying that the people have imagined it. They possibly are extremely real to them,
Mm.
but I don't believe this is what we're seeing. There's something else behind it, I think. You know, how can you trust them? Because we had, first of all, in the 50s, of them rambling on then about their concerns for atomic warfare. They were very concerned about it.
Yeah.
And you have this uh, concern magnified by all these people. We've got to stop using this. Well, I'm not being funny, but all they need do if they were so concerned is whip around in their ships, nullify, because they'll know where they are, nullify all the missiles, we'll build more, nullify them, we build more. We've won. We can't use them. They've won, and it's all silent. And then you see, this is an illusion. And also in the 90s, then we then shift from nukes to the environmental issues. That was very hot in the 90s. The Greys were telling people the concerns for the water, things are dying. And they did nothing. And people stated that they have done something, that they have shut some of these silos down. Yeah, one or two, but that might be enforcing the trick they're promoting, that they're not really concerned, that this is just a fad. It's
Mm.
very ugly indeed.
Is
And
it,
people,
sorry, is it just to sort of keep people focused on something else?
yes, you've got it. That's it, Craig. It's
Okay.
keeping our attention swayed from what
Mm.
really is going on. That's right, you've got it. You knew, didn't you? And you have
That's what
people
I was.
saying,
That's what I was working out as you were explaining it. Yeah, yeah.
you look this way, you look that way, but don't look this way in a
Mm.
particular direction. And I've had people state that, you know, they're not allowed to intervene. So that is why we have the lack of the nullifications of our nukes. Well, that's absolutely nonsense because they contradicted that statement already because they're here. What are they doing here? If they're not intervene, they're doing that already. So again, it's a contradiction.
Yeah. So
You
is
know?
science fiction is science fiction in the media being driven by this unknown
Yeah.
entity or intelligence that's behind how we this is another question there as well. Is it all to do with individual perception? So
Yes.
you talk about the greys, you talk about cryptids, you talk about uh fairies. Is that all to do with an individual person's perception of what they're being shown? Do we all perceive things differently?
I believe so, because subconsciously we all know about werewolves, we know
Hmm.
about aliens, or most of us do. We know about pixies, fairies, things like that. It's just interesting that they become these things, you know. As I said, you can't have a Dalek. They couldn't have a Dalek coming through your bedroom wall in a flash of light because it would be absolutely ridiculous. They would absolutely um, scream with laughter. And that's the whole point, you see. These things don't cause that. It might cause disbelief, but people actually stop and question. They think about these things, the werewolves, the pixies, the fairies, the Bigfoots, the aliens themselves. It's all just on the fringe, the cusp of
Yeah, it's sort of fantastical up to a certain point, isn't it? But
it is.
it's not taking it into the realms of, like you say, if suddenly you were laid in bed and a Dalek appeared at the bottom of the bed, you'd think, hang on a minute, but if a shadow person appeared at the bottom of your bed, or
Yeah.
even if a grey alien suddenly appeared at the bottom of your bed, you will be shocked and you will be frightened, but it wouldn't have that same, hang on a minute, there's a Dalek at the bottom of my bed. This isn't.
Yes.
It wouldn't have that sort of effect. It would have the effect that they want to have the effect on you, and not that, hang on a minute, something's not right here, sort of effect,
Yeah,
if you like.
that would show that this force or this power, whatever it is,
Hmm.
um, knows us very, very well. We'll take the airships as an example.
Okay.
I did some work on them, the 1890s, the wave of exotic airships. I mean, there were airships around. I think Henry Gifford was a designer, an engineer who developed a steerable one, a combustion one. So they weren't uncommon, but people started seeing these very peculiar looking airships, as you and I and many others know about. And they even flew so low as to actually drift over towns to begin with. One crashed in I think it was Judge Proctor's, um, near his property. I think that was his name. Forgive me if it's wrong. I have got it all done. There's so many names and things going through my mind, but it exploded, and there was a strange little man in there. Well, that couldn't have come from Venus or Mars. There's no way it could have traveled from there. But it's just this again a demonstration of this force, of this power, utilizing man's own innovations, but just pushing them ahead slightly, a little bit more forward.
Yeah,
Very bizarre, isn't it?
it is. So my original question before I got sidetracked by my second question was that it is science fiction in the media being driven by this intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be. Who
Uh,
knows? I mean,
uh,
that's quite possible.
yeah, and is it in order to get us used to the idea of let's say, teleportation or warp drive or phasers, or food bank replicators that can just produce anything that you program into them, in the in
Yeah.
matter of seconds. Is that what's going on in the media? Do you think possibly um, trying to brainwash us into believing that these things are perfectly normal and they're going to happen?
Yeah.
Or is it something else, do you think?
Well, I think that narrative itself is interesting because I think we ourselves will develop those things in time. Absolutely. I mean, you had the fly, didn't, with the teleportation system, the disasters of that,
Mm.
um, and with the phases, Star Trek, and the food banks as well, which is unlimited, which is amazing, from Voyager and certainly from, I think, Jean-Luc Picard's era of Star Trek.
Mm.
But I don't know. I tend to think that something is watching what we're doing and is aware of our progress at all. And that's what I want to state about this back-engineered technology. Let's move a little bit
Mm.
further back to 1947, the very famous case of Roswell, the
Mm.
Roswell crash of 1947. If that had exotic hardware in there, people are arguing that it's reverse engineered. They're trying to do that. But my argument is, and I'll put this politely, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, and I don't have any proof. It's just a hypothesis. I stated that wouldn't it be more like one of us handing the Victorians one of our modern day mobile phones, or for the Americans, cell phones,
Mm.
and asking them to replicate it? Because surely, unless it was more or less compatible with our own tech back then, which I don't think it would have been, no way, how on earth are they to discern what they've got? Do they work on nuclear fusion?
Mm.
I don't think so. Do they use copper wiring? I don't think so. You see where this is going. So
Mm.
that is bizarre in itself. I'm not saying that they haven't because I can't prove that, but it just seems a little bit too far-fetched if that did happen, if the Roswell ship did crash. I believe there is something to that, actually. Absolutely. I'm not going down any other avenue with it, but I do believe that something very exotic crashed there because the military firstly announced that they had in their possession a flying disc,
Mm.
to then change it or alter it, as we all know, to a weather balloon.
Yeah.
And I think they could discern the difference. I don't blame them for that. I actually don't blame them for doing that because if they had something um, exotic in their grasp, they would then understand the magnitude of what they actually had, so they would silence it. And of course, they also did it for the benefit of other countries because if it was publicly known, categorically proved that they had in possession a flying disc from another world or dimension, the other countries will raise eyebrows to think, well, what have you got?
Mm.
Paranoia will set in. What exactly? Why did it land on the United States soil? Why didn't it land in India or Russia or China or the UK? Why the Great America? So it will tick a lot of people off. So I think they did the right thing. But of course, the whole thing is muddied. You have some people writing books, Roswell, the truth. Well, the truth would only appeal to that particular narrative because we've got none.
Yeah.
Most of the people sadly have died, they've passed away. So we're never going to know. It becomes an enigma.
Yeah.
But, and we're left scratching our heads. It's
Mm.
not our own. It's not our fault. Any of us.
Yeah.
We're just trying to find the truth of this. But
Yeah, and of
yeah,
course, I mean, it could have been a lot more dangerous for the Americans to actually admit that they had something, because then you've got the Russians, the Chinese, anybody else would say, "Well, hang on a minute, if you've got it, we want it."
that's right, Craig. Absolutely. It becomes a snake pit.
Yeah,
And
and it could, of course, it could have created, problems where we could have ended up. Some countries may have decided to go to war over it.
yeah, there's another point I'd make. If they were delivering technology, this was a Trojan horse, as I mentioned in the
Mm.
Digital Demon, I think 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense
Mm.
because I'm going to have to question that, because why on earth would they be sending advanced equipment to a race of people or humans who've just left the Great War, the Second World War? What would they be giving them tech for? You
Mm.
know, and if that was another question that completely stumped me about this Roswell ship, and it doesn't make any sense that if it had crashed, I mean, surely it would have had backup, an SOS, something. Nothing came.
Mm.
That's what caused me to believe it might have been a Trojan horse. And of course, we had other crashes across the world. There were other crashes, as speculated, but the ships were all different. And I kept thinking, well, could it be the same thing, sending different packages, making them look different, along with the pilots, so as not to raise eyebrows that the same species is having the same problem in crashing on Earth? You
Mm.
know, it didn't make any sense. You see where this is going. It's like you think you have something, but
Mm.
then you're completely thrown back a bit and you're knocked back. This is the trouble with this subject. You think you're getting somewhere, you're gaining traction, but then you're completely thrown back. It's like the ghosts,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the paranormal, the ghosts, which I do believe are real, the poltergeists are real, absolutely.
Mm.
Things like that, you just can't. You just it's as if it's you get if you get too close, you think you get your fingers burned. You
Yeah,
just can't get there. You can't touch it. It's very fascinating, but frustrating.
yeah. You think you've answered the question, and then another question pops up.
Yeah, yeah, and it goes on and on and
It
on.
goes on and on and on. No, that's interesting. I've never heard of that sort of premise with regards to Roswell before, and actually, it makes an awful lot of sense
Yeah,
that
yeah, it's
it was something which was sent as a decoy. Because you're quite right. I mean, as a race of species, I mean, we've had two hugely destructive world wars within the space of about 30 years, 20,
yeah,
25 years. We'd just come out of a massively destructive global war. And of course, well, I say there had been the use of nuclear weapons for the first time.
yeah,
So, you know, why would an alien race suddenly land in the middle of the desert in America with, you know, equipment and technology that was far advanced of our own at the time? Because
yeah.
you could bet your bottom dollar, no pun intended, that we would use it for the wrong purposes.
That's right, absolutely. Especially in the hands of the military. No disrespect to them. I mean, you can't blame them. They'll
No,
be like kids in a sweet shop.
absolutely.
Another point about this is the fact that some clever clogs mentioned that I actually stated the Trojan horse I came out with. I kept it quiet until I came out with it in 5 years ago, because I keep thinking and thinking about this, and I've got some new ideas about it as well. But some clever clocks. I also mentioned, isn't it funny, isn't it, that apart from Proctor, the Judge Proctor, I think that was his name. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I do believe that's of the 1890s when the airship, that exotic ship,
Yeah.
exploded and crashed in his garden, destroying his prized plants.
He's
I'm more
proud.
concerned about his prized plants, I think, bless his heart. But you know, they appear to land in kind of rural regions, not suburbia. And some clever clogs said, well, that's because there's more land than there is built up areas. Well, no, absolutely not. That might be factual, but the emphasis of this is that they actually do crash in rural regions. And
Mm.
there's probably a reason behind it. So again, it strengthens the Trojan horse hypothesis, but it completely backfires in regard to what they are delivering, unless it's something else we do not know about, but the military do, unless they're depositing something, maybe not technology, but something else. You know, it interested me when I saw David Grush being interviewed at the congressional hearing where they're trying to force disclosure, which between you and me, I believe we're never going to have,
Mm.
because it's so drawn out.
Mm.
The aerospace tech companies or whoever has these alleged ships in storage and their pilots, all they need to do is just shift them to somewhere else. And by the time they've got the key to unlock it, they're gone. You know, it's, it's one of those things. You know, it goes on and on and on. But he mentioned about them being non-human, bio something he called them. Now, this is very interesting. They didn't call them aliens.
Mm. My
as we would.
idea.
That, yes, it's
Really.
something off-world, but certainly it did appear to me when they stated that, or he stated that, if it is to be believed, of course, I don't doubt him. There must be something to it.
Mm.
I don't think they're deceiving us. Why on earth would they do that? Um, that they're probably closer to home. Someone mentioned the oceans. Well, yes, the oceans are vast, and sources have been known to be seen by crew members on ships, breaking the waters and hovering for a bit before they shoot off, or Antarctica. It just struck me as very strange that he would refer to them as non-human and not alien. That's very interesting what he stated. As I said, Craig, I don't think we're going to get any disclosure at all. We never have, and the trouble is people publish more and more books stating they know this and they know that, but we all we can do is trust our own judgment. It's like my encounters. I
Yeah.
accept the fact that people might deny them. That's fair enough. If you don't believe it, that's fine. We are entitled to our own opinions, our own beliefs, and I'm quite cool with that. If they call me an out and out liar, let them do it. I've seen them. I don't know what they are. I won't call them alien or things from other worlds because we just don't know what we're dealing with. But it's very something supernatural.
Yeah. Or multi-dimensional, or
Yeah.
anything along those lines. Um, just going back to the new book, you mentioned in the new book about Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
I'm just interested what your take is on that, because that is something which is very much in the paranormal stroke cryptozoology stroke um, UFO headlines most of the time. There are numerous film crews go there all the time over in America, and people make pilgrimages to go to this place. And I don't really actually know an awful lot about it. It's not something that I've really sort of interested myself in, because I do sometimes think that these sort of things are sometimes a little bit contrived in
Yeah.
order to make financial gains and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So I really don't know much about it. I'm just wondering what your take is on it.
Yeah. It's in Utah, a section of land that belonged to a family who reported extremely bizarre um, incidences like poltergeist activity. One family, the last family who owned it before it was taken over from the Scientific Institute, believed they had seen a huge wolf. I mean, this wolf was massive. I
Right,
think its head came to their shoulders,
right.
snaking down towards them, very friendly, beautiful eyes. And then he turned and was interested in the calf. So he went for the calf and they got their shotguns and they shot him. And it dislodged a piece of flesh, but it didn't seem to, hinder him at all. But he did trot off and they followed him and his tracks disappeared. So I believe it's a paranormal hotspot. If these things are happening, as stated, I think there is something to it again, because I believe there is evidence to support this through the families or the incidents prior to the Scientific Institute taking over. Um, you know, I believe that what they're doing is they're exciting this phenomena because, as you rightly stated, Craig, it's cryptic, it's paranormal, it's aliens, it's everything. It's a mishmash of everything there.
Yeah.
You see, so the more they study it, the more it's going to play with them. It's like a toy to it. They're like toys to it, something to play with. That's what comes to my mind. And I don't think they're going to find out what it is because this thing has been around for perhaps millennia. It's been with us for a long time. I mean, we had werewolves in, I believe, the 1700s, they were reported,
Mm.
perhaps even further back. Certainly, I think was it the French king or someone offered a reward for the execution of it, and they believed they caught it, but the killings still occurred.
Yeah.
It bit people's heads off as well back then. So I think there is something to this Skinwalker Ranch, absolutely. And you can't blame them for studying it.
No,
I
of course.
admire them. I mean, I love to go there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Philip and myself would love to go there to feel what we can pick up. Or, I mean, we're not special, but certainly using your mind and that. This thing also is able, I believe, to actually, it's connected to consciousness. It would be quite logical to suggest that because I believe there was a story of them installing cameras in that ranch. And it evidently knew where the cameras were. And I don't know whether it destroyed them or did something to them, so it's playing with them. They're being played with. It's very bizarre. I would imagine that would be a paranormal hotspot,
Mm.
just like the Bermuda Triangle was. That's gone quiet, isn't it? The Bermuda Triangle.
Well, it
Uh,
has. Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
that planes used to disappear. All the pilots report seeing different things as they're flying through this strange lands appearing, and then they compass goes crazy, and then they find out that they've lost time or whatever.
Yeah,
So
I mean, do you think? I mean, you were talking about sort of periods in time where there's sort of particular um sort of subjects or phenomena, shall we say, that are in vogue at the time.
yes,
So you were talking about saucer shaped UFOs that land with feet and a sort of alien type creature comes out and it's covered in silver foil and all that sort of thing. That was very much in vogue in the 1950s, wasn't it?
yes, yes, that's right.
As quite rightly said. So the Bermuda Triangle then, which was sort of what, 1970s, 1980s, do you think?
Yeah, I would say more so the 70s and 80s. Very hot then, yes.
Yeah, so do you think again that was part of this um uh sort of program of misinformation that were being fed to sort of keep us looking in the wrong direction?
Yes.
And the Bermuda Triangle was very much the in vogue thing for that sort of period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It shifts, doesn't it? It shifts. It seems to shift. And people say location is key. No, I don't believe that is the case. I think mind is key here. Mind is key because it seems to know where you are. I'll give you an example. One of the stories I published in there was to do with the wonderful Martin Groves, the deputy sheriff, respected police officer 30 odd years ago, maybe more than that now, where him and his mate went turkey hunting in the land between the lakes, and they saw these werewolves. They encountered them. They were real. It was grinning down at him, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, it was horrifying. So it knows where they and they were alone. They were in the middle of nowhere, and they were alone, and these things found them. So I believe it's not location is key. I think they've got that wrong. I'm going to say it's mind is key because it doesn't matter where you go, what you do, it will follow you. And certainly, as I've seen, I've watched no end of fascinated by the um, programs on YouTube. Uh, there's one, What Lurks Beneath, and
Mm.
the host there, we had him on radio
Yeah.
a while ago, and he's absolutely fantastic, Josh. And a lot of these cases, even he is like yourself and us. You want to try and question this all, and you have to. Where people, when they're like secluded or alone, or minimum people with them, these things happen, and more than not in the national parks in America, as we all know about. We've heard the stories of the national parks, very strange things occurring, or as Martin Groves published in his wonderful book, The Land Between the Lakes, the incident with the werewolves there, and they were completely in the middle of nowhere. There's no one around them, no one. They set up camp and they were there, they appeared. So I believe it follows people. So, in regard, you're quite right, Craig, in regard to Bermuda Triangle, it could be these things that invoke, or, the hotspots shift,
Yeah.
and also the manner in which they are um, conveyed shift. So I'm going to have the Skinwalker Ranch. What's going to be next? I mean, and what is it with that area that causes this? I don't think it's anything to do with the area. It's belief, because the shamans didn't they put a curse on Skinwalker Ranch, a skinwalker. So it was a curse enforced by many of the tribe for their enemies. So they created this curse. So something, it appears, was evidently listening.
So you think it could be this, going back to what you started talking about initially, then this sort of,
Force
yeah,
this.
this entity, this sinister
Yes, I
force.
called it the Atomic Magician. This is the closest I can get to it.
Hmm.
I've got Chris Evers in his Outer Limits magazine. Um, he published the first take on it. So, because I mentioned the Star Trek and I mentioned the silver and I mentioned all these other bits and pieces, and I thought, it seems to me the only word I could put it into human words is the atomic magician. It's very weak, I know, or lame, but it's the only thing I could think of. Something, calling it something like that. It becomes real. And the fairy lights. Now, I don't know if Martin Grove saw them or others, but more than not, they're reported these little balls of lights. I even assumed that's probably them, or what they're to transpire into. They arrive, and these balls have been portrayed even in Disney cartoons. Like we have Sleeping Beauty. The little fairies were portrayed as little glowing balls of
Well,
light.
light, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So is it taking heed to even our own Disney, the Disney Empire? Is it taking heed and listening, watching? It's fascinating. We just don't know, but these incidents do happen, and they're horrifying, absolutely horrifying
Yeah,
to the
so
people
it's
involved.
yeah, I mean the question that I was trying to get out earlier on before I went off down a tangent was the whole science fiction thing. I mean, is it science fiction that's driving our perception of this atomic magician, or is it the atomic magician that's driving science fiction?
No, I think it's our science fiction driving that thing. I
Right.
think
Power.
it can
Right.
only be
Yeah.
because the innovations. Henry Gifford of an example of the airship, although flight wasn't new then. I mean, the first aerial craft to take flight was a kite.
Mm,
So man's ambition to actually fly like the birds became realized wonderfully, but something else might have been taking notes, observing it. And it's just strange that these things are always slightly more advanced. I'm not saying all of them. I'm not saying all of them. Could it be possible that the Greys, a faction of them, are genuine and it knows of this and it thought, well, this is good. This is marvelous. This will be the new thing. I've got an actual, more or less,
yeah.
face to toy with the others with. I'm not saying it's playing with us in the manner of a child, you know,
Mm,
happy with toys. It's something far more sinister, and it would ultimately, I think, or concluded, it must have to do with fear. I mean, let's take the Greys for an example. The research I did into them, they always, more than not, they will come in the dead of night when you're half naked,
mm,
you're vulnerable, you're asleep, and they appear by your beds. Now, what kind of entity would do that if they know us very well? They would understand our customs and our ways. So
mm,
why would they do that? To put the fear of God into you.
mm,
I've also heard of accounts where they're bringing dead relatives aboard. Well, again, that's actually terrible because they're actually obviously drumming it out of the minds of their victims. I'll call them victims, and portraying them for them to see, to perhaps make the scenario a little bit more comfortable, even though they are horrified. Oh, we've got Dad here, Dad's there with them, my goodness, or to confound them. Again, as you mentioned, Craig, and we have stated, to look this particular way, so you don't look somewhere else. You don't see through the visage, the mirage of them, whatever's creating this, it's like being caught in a spell, isn't it? It's like
mm.
being caught in this spell, this terrible spell until it's all over and done with. As again, it's just merely hypothesis. We're just punching these things out. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean there are. My brain is whizzing around at about 1,000,000 miles an hour at the minute, trying to think about what the ramifications of all this is. Because I mean, I started thinking when you were talking about that then about, well, you know, if you bring in religion into this, for instance, I mean, could you be looking at something which we have perceived to be something demonic or something which is very devil-like? Which is manipulating us for its own purposes.
Absolutely, absolutely. It seems to be belief, um,
Yeah.
although it has concentrated to a degree on the manner in which it appears. I believe even the men in black, a lot of them were this thing. I mean, the men in black were this force after when they've had an encounter. It makes it even more terrifying, doesn't it? There are so many different kinds of creatures reported, certainly in the national parks. I
Mm.
mean, it just struck me as being too much, just too much. And this is what narrows it down logically, although we're talking about something that's completely illogical. Logically, it would narrow it down to something sinister. Do you know what it reminds me of? The wonderful, brilliant Stephen King, a wonderful master horror writer. Absolutely love that man. He wrote a book called It.
I knew
And
I knew you were going to go down that
yeah,
down that.
Pennywise the clown. Yeah, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
this thing could change into people's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
I love Mr. King. I
Mm.
absolutely adore him. Actually, I will tell you now, I boast a little bit, although I'm not boastful at all. I haven't got an ego to bruise. Um, we heard from him. Philip and I had sent him a copy of our science fiction book. Oh, it was 2010, many years ago.
Yeah.
And although the king himself, the wonderful king, did not write back, his secretary wrote back, and I also sent some images of my reptilians with this book. Some of my pencil drawings, and when I drew in pencil of these reptilian beings, well, he kept them.
Wow.
And he kept the book, and he said, "Mr. King is very pleased to hear from you." He couldn't endorse our book because we wanted him to endorse this.
Mm.
So it would have been around 2010 because the dear man, he's so busy, my goodness. But he wished us well with it. And so I thought, oh my word, he's such a lovely gentleman. We've actually touched the edge of Stephen King. We've actually touched his world. But
And a very bizarre world it is as well.
yeah, but the thing is that it was a genius
Yeah.
thing to conceive because we are dealing with something like that. Now, has that in itself um, cottoned on to this best-selling international award-winning author's mind to conjure these things, to enforce its program of deceit? Who knows? But
Yeah.
certainly there are similarities to that and Mr. King's marvelous It. And I'm referring to the actual original TV series, which I enjoyed better. No disrespect to the movie makers of the film, that's for the new generation, but referring back to the original mini series, which I absolutely adored. And that thing was something from the multiverse.
Mm.
So, an interdimensional kind of entity. I
Yeah.
know he portrayed it as a spider, a
Mm.
giant spider, but the emphasis is there. You know what I mean? Something quite different.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that's controlling us or manipulating us. No, it's quite bizarre that, because I think probably about 20 minutes ago, when you were telling me about the book, I started to get an image of a clown
Yeah.
going through my mind, and it was exactly that sort of controlling devious entity that I was getting a mental image of.
Yeah, it's the only thing logically that I can try and think of. I mean, as I said, I might well be wrong, but it would seem that the proof is in the pudding, basically. I mean, when you rationally look at it, you've got to, as yourself, you're a marvelous researcher yourself. You dig, whereas others don't. And not be disrespectful. The people who say no, you're wrong, they don't look into it. It's like time travel. I'll just touch on that just very briefly. I've denounced it. And I've been attacked already for that. But you see, time is in itself an illusion. Time was created by man. There's no such thing as time. It's a mere measurement. What are they going to drive the machine through? H.G. Wells had a beautiful vision and it was fantastic, but unfortunately, time is not a reality. This is why I keep thinking, I said to Philip, my brother, when we look at the universe, we're using our own time. The universe does not pander to it at all. It has nothing to do with time, nor does these things perhaps entering our realm. We have only just created time as a form of measurement. So, think on that, for the people who will denounce it, it would cause a lot of controversy because they'll be stating, well, you're wrong. There's people from the future. Where? When? How? We need proof. We've got nothing, even with this subject. Mere
It's
speculation.
it's just a way of quantifying the difference between point A and point B in your life, isn't it?
Yeah, the point is we are always in the now.
Mm.
We have created the past.
Yeah.
They are memories. The future is aspirations, what is to come. We have developed mental models of these, so it becomes dogmatic. But the point is, and the truth is, we are only of the now. Man has created time. If we think of that, then you're going to make progress, or people make progress with this ideology of where they're coming from. Because I don't believe it's time itself. There might be something else, and I've mentioned this in illusions, but I'm not going to state it on here. But it's certainly not time. There might be something else to it, but it's not time.
Do you know, that is really strange, because where I live, we have a cricket pitch in the middle of the village, and it's a big open green space, which is sort of like a communal area that people can go and walk the dogs and so on. And all the way around it are park benches that people have donated when they've lost loved ones. And there's usually little plaques on to say that this particular bench has been donated by such and such a body. One of them that I walk past with the dogs on a regular basis actually has an inscription on it, and it does say, and I've just and I this is honest truth. It says, "Time is an illusion. There is only now."
Wow. Do you know what? That was meant to be, Craig. I was meant to hear that. Do you know what? That is freaky, isn't it?
It
That's
is.
really
And what I will
freaky.
do when I take the dogs for a walk tomorrow, I will take a photograph of it and I will pop it on my Facebook page and I'll send you a photograph of it, Ron.
Oh,
Because
wow.
that
That's
is
spooky.
just really, it is, isn't it? That is really, really spooky. But it's a phrase that's after the first time I saw it, it's a phrase that stuck with me.
Yeah. And it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. I was sucked into, don't get me wrong, I was sucked into time travel when I was younger because I was ignorant until
Well, it's
you,
exciting, isn't it? It's
yeah, I mean, the idea, I mean, I'd love to go back and see the Tyrannosaurus Rex at a safe distance, of course, because I'm fascinated with that beast, but there's no way around it, actually.
No, absolutely not. No, that's just blown my mind a little bit. That, to be honest, I think that's a really good point. For you to tell us where we can get your book.
Yeah, well, it's available from Amazon because the mainstream publishers won't touch it with a barge pole.
I know the feeling well.
Well, I've been very naughty in there. I've mentioned some things about the government as well, which aren't very positive.
Right.
Very lightly, but not very positive. I've been brought up to know my manners, to be respectful, but some things just need to be addressed. A few things. The book is available from Amazon. It's called Illusions, and it's published by Philip Mantle, the wonderful Philip Mantle's Flying Disc Press, and it's available as hardback, paperback, ebook, and also the audio. Now, I love the audio because it's an American
Okay.
and he's got a kind of tongue-in-cheek voice. I love it. He gets the message across there, but he's got a smashing voice.
Fabulous. No, I'll definitely have to check that out then. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Ron. Thank you. You're one of those guests that I remember the first time I spoke to you when I stopped recording and I went away and thought about what we talked about. You left me with a hell of a lot more questions than I had when I first started to speak to you, and I think you've done it again.
Oh, well, it works vice versa. We bounce off each other. People, this is what we need.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people have ego and they
Yeah,
won't give anything out. Whereas if you bash it out, I always said if you have a room full of researchers, you might get somewhere with that a chalkboard and a stick of chalk.
absolutely. No, I think a healthy discussion on this on these sort of subjects is interesting. I think it's stimulating. I'm sure the people that have listened to the podcast have found it as fascinating as I have, because it's certainly, again, it's one of those subjects that really does raise more questions than answers.
Yes, absolutely. We said this, didn't we? This the proof. There's no proof, but
I'm not
speculation.
sure I'll sleep very well tonight. No, it's been an absolute pleasure, on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh,
Hope to speak to you again soon, and good luck with the book.
thank you.
Never mind about the publishers; they've got absolutely no idea. Philip's the man, isn't he? He'll push it for you and take it forward. And I just urge anybody who listens to this podcast to go out and either buy the book or in fact, I am definitely going to listen to the audio book because I'm quite intrigued now by how this gentleman delivers it. So I think that could be quite fun to listen to.
Thank you very much, Craig, and always an absolute pleasure. You're a real gentleman.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome, and you too. Thank you for being a guest again.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care.